The Twilight Zone feels like something that's always existed. It hasn't. It premiered in 1959, and has had several revivals and a movie since then, but something about the ageless, ethereal quality of The Twilight Zone and the moments that have been burned into popular culture and learned through osmosis gives it that feeling, that quality. Getting on your plane and joking that you see something on the wing has become as ritualistic as Sunday Mass. The twist ending in film and television is so intertwined with this series that Twilight Zone is synonymous with this style of storytelling. It's the anthology series upon which all other anthology series are compared, and because of this, The Twilight Zone has this ancient and timeless quality to it. But the truth is, The Twilight Zone is very much a product of its time. The social issues it tackled following the largest world conflict in history and the emerging civil rights movement. The 1985 Twilight Zone had episodes about Vietnam veterans only a few years removed from their conflict, underappreciated women in the workplace, and other social concerns of the time. It was very much of the 80s. The 2002 Twilight Zone had episodes about bigotry, paranoia about terror attacks, and lots more. It was very much of that time. In 2019, a new revival of The Twilight Zone premiered, continuing the anthology's sci-fi horror fantasy stories mixed with social commentary. Critical appraisal was mostly positive, fresh on Rotten Tomatoes and generally favorable on Metacritic, and it received the now typical, tedious, reactionary response from the chuds. "Oh no, they made The Twilight Zone woke," as if it hadn't already been for 60 years. Put a pin in that, we'll come back to it later. Let's go through arguably the best episodes of the new series so far. Replay. Nina is escorting her son Dorian to college. During this journey, she discovers that her old camcorder has the power to turn back time when she presses rewind. Nina and Dorian are pulled over by a state trooper named Lasky. Nina, probably having dealt with the police her whole life, tells her son to follow Lasky's instructions. Nina uses the camcorder to reverse time. In this timeline, she and Dorian pull over even before the trooper tells them to, but that still isn't enough to save themselves. Nina reverses time again and stops at a motel to avoid Lasky, but he finds them anyway. And things go wrong. Again. This continues over and over.
Found it here!
No matter what they do, no matter how closely they follow the instructions of Lasky, it's not enough to save Dorian. The narrative of the white police officer taking liberties with people of color is common in film and television due to how closely it resembles real-life encounters. However, what this episode of The Twilight Zone does is go after the counter-narrative that apologists tend to use whenever cases like this make headlines. Apologists always say, "Well, he should have done what the police said. It's his own fault." But these ignorant declarations do not take into account a few important things. First, even if someone is rightfully suspected of a crime, a disproportionate amount of force is not justified. Selling smokes without a license is not a capital offense. Second, often is the case that force is used even when the suspect does everything the officer says. Yet, even when these encounters are recorded, apologists for the police will then invent some other justification, like something that must have happened that was not recorded. But that just runs into the first issue. Even if someone is rightfully suspected, disproportionate force is still not justified. Replay shows us these encounters and the arguments of the apologists. No matter what Nina and Dorian do, no matter how nice she is to Lasky, no matter how closely they follow instructions, no matter how closely they follow the law, they are still subject to his pursuit and his wrath. Those who saw the episode and just thought it was another woke story about the dangers of the police missed the very specific facet of these encounters that sometimes go unnoticed. The apologia for the police and the false assumption by the apologists that there is always a way to avoid said torment or mistreatment. Sometimes, no matter how much you try, no matter what you do, if the police have it in their mind to torment you, they will do that. In the climax of the episode, Nina confronts Lasky. With so many students recording the encounter, he backs down.
Targeting us, following us, shooting us, killing us. Not anymore.
About 10 years later, the camcorder is accidentally broken, and after Dorian leaves the house, police lights reflect on Nina's face. It will never stop. Even if we record mistreatment by the police, they can still get away with it. The entire incident can be recorded and put on the internet for all to see, right there, clear as crystal, and generally the police are exonerated. In addition to having a new take on police and their apologists, the episode is highly suspenseful. Each time Nina hits rewind, we are left wondering how she can change things to create a new result. The escape scene immediately prior to the climax is tense, and just when we think the tension has been broken, Lasky appears and the tension is ramped up. A false ending. And then in the epilogue, another false ending. He never stopped. It will never stop. They have too much power, and sometimes there is nothing that can be done, no matter how many chances there are. Speaking of the police, A Traveler is the story of a police officer named Yuka, her captain, a man named Pendleton, and a mysterious stranger who suddenly appears in their jail. He claims to be an extreme tourist, and one thing on his bucket list is to be pardoned by Pendleton. The captain, ready to believe this obvious fabrication, because it suits his ego, releases the traveler and allows him to join the station Christmas party. Yuka is unconvinced. Everything the traveler says turns out to be either a lie or a means in which to turn the partygoers against one another. Even his truths are insincere. Eventually, Pendleton comes around and stuffs the traveler back in his jail cell. Throughout the episode, there are references to their town sharing a power grid with the nearby Air Force base and how close their Alaskan home is to Russia. The traveler, in order to divide the captain and Yuka further, spins a tale about Pendleton supplying intelligence to the Russians. Pendleton leaves to check on some equipment, and Yuka, previously disbelieving everything the traveler says, accepts this spy business as truth. She's sick of working for Pendleton, sick of trying to assimilate into another culture so she can be accepted. The traveler's words might be lies, but these are lies that she wants to hear. Lies that she is willing to believe, regardless of the source. It's no coincidence that the background noise of the episode is that of a conflict between the United States and Russia. The real battle isn't between the two powers, but between the people and those who would manipulate the people by telling them lies that they are willing to believe. Fake news, propaganda, creating enemies where they don't exist, dividing the people to take power. The traveler's alien nature is uncovered. The invasion begins. Yuka's brother, sitting in jail due to a drunken disorderly charge, not only accepts this foreign influence, but applauds it. Because even though they have bad intentions, they are fighting against people he doesn't like. It's a familiar sentiment if you have ever heard someone suddenly believe in the goodness of dangerous entities because said entities gave them what they wanted.
I did nothing but lie to you. Only once I said something that might benefit you, you chose to ignore it.
There is no one-to-one allegory here. The aliens aren't Russia or the president. Rather, the episode is a melange of ideas about truth and misinformation, about taking advantage of fear to assume power. The performances, particularly from Steven Yeun, are strong, and the mood it sets, the mystery, is highly suspenseful and worth the Twilight Zone name. Blurry Man. The season finale features Seth Rogen seeing the end of the world and Jordan Peele playing Jordan Peele. An excellent fake-out, the opening scene stops in its tracks, and the episode becomes the story of Sophie, the writer of the episode within an episode. The Twilight Zone goes meta, and debates the merits of sci-fi and horror that has a point to make, and sci-fi and horror that exists to frighten and to let people experience the nightmare without having to live in it. It was written by the same writer as the premiere, The Comedian, which definitely had a point to make. But Blurry Man takes the opposite perspective and shows that there is value in simply letting the horror inside you. This is among the most widely praised episodes, though I personally preferred 6 Degrees of Freedom for its claustrophobia and performances, as well as the aforementioned replay for its more grounded horror over the meta-horror of Blurry Man. If I have one major complaint about the first season of this Twilight Zone revival, it's that it spent too much time referencing the 1959 series. Not just by remaking Nightmare at 30,000 Feet, a good episode that is indeed a completely different story. I mean the constant Easter eggs and sly references to famous episodes of the past. This is in service of die-hard fans who want their long-term standing for Twilight Zone to be acknowledged, and frankly, I think we could do without playing a game that amounts to letting viewers know who the so-called real fans of the show are with this I Spy silliness. Blurry Man remarks on this, showing Rod Serling as quite literally a shadow that haunts the new series. Jordan Peele's Twilight Zone can stand on its own, and I hope they ditch the goofy fan service in Season 2. Complaints about the series by others tend to vary. One complaint is that the episodes are too long, and that they are mandated to drag in the middle to suit the standard operating procedure of the hour-long drama. The original Twilight Zone was only a half hour with commercials, not counting Season 4, which expanded to an hour. However, the idea that these episodes have to fit neatly within a time frame and a specific format is disproved by looking at the runtimes for the season's episodes. 2 episodes only run about 37 minutes, 2 over 50 minutes, and the rest around 40. The Twilight Zone is on the CBS streaming service. The writers of this revival have more freedom to tell their story as quickly or slowly as they please, unlike the confined, commercial-driven format of the original series. The episodes aren't mandated to be long and to drag. The scripts are as long as the writers wanted them to be. Some episodes feel like movies, and movies have down moments in the middle when the protagonist is at their lowest. The episodes don't drag, they're just movies, and they follow the movie format. The other common complaint about the revival is that it isn't subtle enough, and that the message of each episode is too blunt. First of all, well, that's the Twilight Zone. This isn't a Panos Cosmatos nightmare or a David Lynch mystery puzzle to be solved. The Twilight Zone is a series of fables, moral lessons made through narratives like The Scorpion and the Frog or The Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. A fable generally ends with an explicit message to the reader, often in the form of some maxim. Episodes of The Twilight Zone generally end with an explicit message to the viewer, originally told by Rod Serling, and now by Jordan Peele.
Now, when you put on an old movie, it's possible that it'll be a movie made about some social problem, but a problem that was contemporary 6, 7, 10, 15 years, 20 years ago. And that makes it safe.
Oh, no question
And
about
again, this is the kind of programming that television, national television seems to be, this escapist type.
Mm-hmm. It's reminiscent of television in its early days, when indeed there was certainly a race problem in those days. It wasn't out in the street. It wasn't loud in our ears. It wasn't infesting our gut, our conscious gut, as it is today. But by God, there was anguish amongst minorities then, as there is now. I think the purpose, the point of a dramatic show, which is used as a vehicle of social criticism, is to involve an audience, to show them wherein their guilt lies, or at least, indeed, their association. But when you're talking about a bunch of cavalrymen knocking off a bunch of poor redskins and putting them into a reservation, the audience need to have no association, certainly no guilt. How many Indians have they pushed into a reservation? But if indeed you talk about a denial of a man putting his garbage can next to yours, whether he's fought in Vietnam or wherever, by virtue of his color, now you're getting into a universal guilt, which they should feel, or at least in part understand. But I do believe the nature of the times now demand that television takes positions. You see, I think this is a distortion. Now, when we're talking about, if indeed they want to have the temerity to suggest what is a moment in American history, or world history, do it properly.
Is that too blunt? Well, maybe. Your mileage may vary. But personally, after years of writing about movies and watching film bros misinterpret Fight Club and Taxi Driver, getting the exact opposite message and using said message to reinforce their toxic worldviews, I have become 100% okay with media being more blunt about its messaging. When someone derides a piece of media for lacking subtlety as the reason that it fails, they are effectively claiming that subtlety is an essential quality of artistic media. Someone furiously writes, "Well, that was a bit on the nose," in their article or their tweet, and everyone crowds around and thanks that person for their big brain thinking. But another way of saying that the metaphor was a bit on the nose is to say that the metaphor was on target. The episode Not All Men is rather on the nose, but why shouldn't it be? The writer felt passionately about the subject and wanted the audience to be under no illusions about her intentions. If the episode had been too subtle, then it might not have been as inspiring, and it wouldn't have skewered its target as well. It might have missed the target. Not All Men is a story about men seemingly being affected by a fallen meteorite. But in classic Twilight Zone twist fashion, it turns out that the meteorite was only giving men a placebo effect, and that their behavior is learned, and therefore under their control. The metaphor about aggressiveness among men being partly cultural and not simply innate is, well, not subtle. But it shouldn't have to be. It tells men that being aggressive towards others can't be justified by saying it's in their nature, and therefore unavoidable. It's not unavoidable. People can choose to not be awful to each other. It's a good lesson and a tense, exciting episode held together by strong performances. Point of Origin is about a wealthy woman named Eve, whose housekeeper, Anna, is arrested and threatened with deportation. The sci-fi twist is that Eve is actually an alien from another world, but she has lived on Earth so long that she doesn't really remember that. This is her home. Again, not subtle about the subject matter, but who cares? Snow White from Once Upon a Time is an alien, and that's enough reason to abolish ICE. I'm with you. Good enough. Not every story needs a secret meaning, and if you think it does, you have been watching too many YouTube videos along those lines. I freely confessed that I may have contributed to this atmosphere. My bad. Some critics would say that to be unsubtle denies the joy of realization, but that assumes too much. It assumes, first, that the audience will have that realization, and if you have ever seen someone miss the point while watching Starship Troopers, you know that happens. Second, it assumes that this joy of realization is always more important than communicating clearly to a wide audience. If something is communicated clearly, someone leaps up and says that this piece of media is talking down to us. But the point of a novel or television series or movie is not to stroke your ego. This isn't about you. Now, this is very important. I am not saying subtle equals bad or subtle equals good. I'm only saying that there is room in fiction for fables, for allegory, for communicating clearly. A lack of subtlety does not make a piece of media bad. Mad Max Fury Road literally wrote its themes on the wall, and that movie was awesome. A television episode is not a video game. You don't have to solve it in order for it to be worthwhile. If the new Twilight Zone didn't do anything for you, that's fine. Your feelings are valid, and that doesn't mean you're automatically a film bro just because you didn't like it. I'm just saying those guys tend to not like this revival. That's all. The 2019 Twilight Zone does not always lack subtlety. It has subtle performances by accomplished actors, gentle, shadowy imagery that only slowly reveals itself. Its bluntness in some of its episodes is not a failing, it's a strength. It's not as if the writers were trying to code their intentions and social politics in some kind of inscrutable cipher and just accidentally left the code key on the table. No, they had something to say and then they said it, in most cases rather dramatically, profoundly, and with stellar award-nominated performances that struck a lot of emotional resonance. If film bros on film Twitter consistently say that something is too woke, and they say that it lacks subtlety, the overlap suggests something. In their demand for more subtlety, they are actually asking to not be challenged. Instead, they are asking to be able to ignore the social politics of the piece of media. A subtle message would allow them to do this. To ignore. To pretend the message is either not there, or that the message is the opposite of what it actually is, conforming to their worldview. A piece of media with clear communication is not insulting our intelligence. It's challenging us. It's making its point unavoidable and forcing us to think about it. Unsubtle media is confrontational. It's supposed to make us uncomfortable and challenge our preconceived notions in a way that is unambiguous. It's bold and it's risky, but sometimes it works, and I think it worked here. The Twilight Zone has always been this way, always kind of hammy in its delivery, but always in such a way that feels necessary. I don't think we're living in times where we should have to be subtle, or go on and on about how both sides are the same. I think we're living in a time when lines in the sand need to be drawn, and hopefully drawn clearly. No more dancing around the issues. It's getting very real out there, and our fiction, our media, should be able to reflect that.
And they will recognize it as such. And by osmosis or some incredible process, will somewhere along the line be faced with a situation in which they too may have to exercise a prejudice and be conscious of it as an evil. Now, on Twilight Zone, for example, we made a comment on prejudice, on conformity, on intolerance, on censorship.